What happens when a waitress drowning in her sick mother's medical debt gets stiffed on a massive bill by a sneering billionaire's son? You'd expect tears, despair, the crushing weight of defeat. And you'd be right. Amelia's world crumbled in that moment of casual cruelty. But this isn't just a story of hardship. It's a story of what happened next. Just as her spirit hit rock bottom, a silent black Rolls-Royce Phantom ghosted to the restaurant's entrance. The arrogant son smirked, expecting his ride. But the uniformed chauffeur didn't look at him. He walked straight past and headed for Amelia. The first alarm, the 4:30 a.m. one, was a gentle chime. The second at 4:35 a.m. was a jarring buzz designed to simulate a cardiac arrest. It was the only thing that could pierce the thick blanket of exhaustion that clung to Amelia Thompson each morning. Her fingers stiff and calloused from carrying hot plates, fumbled for the dismiss button on her cracked phone screen. For a moment she lay in the pre-dawn stillness of her tiny studio apartment, the city's distant hum, a constant, indifferent companion. On the nightstand next to the phone was a framed photo of her mother, Sarah. Her smile in the picture was wide and genuine from a time before the words chronic, relapse, and experimental treatment had become the cornerstones of their vocabulary. Now that smile was a ghost that haunted Amelia's every waking moment, a reminder of the mountain of debt that grew with every prescription, every hospital visit, every new hope that came with a 5-figure price tag. Amelia was 23. While others her age were posting graduation pictures or European backpacking adventures, her camera roll was a grim gallery of medical bills and insurance rejection letters. She was a pre-nursing student at a community college, a dream that felt more like a cruel joke with each passing day. How could she hope to heal others when she couldn't even afford to heal her own mother? Her uniform was already laid out, a crisp black blouse and trousers she'd washed by hand in the sink the night before. The restaurant Aria was one of Manhattan's temples of modern gastronomy, a place where the city's elite came to perform the theater of their success. For the patrons, it was an evening of indulgence. For Amelia, it was a 12-hour tightrope walk, balancing scorching plates, deciphering passive-aggressive orders, and manufacturing a smile that felt like it was cracking her face in two. The bus ride was a familiar purgatory. She'd lean her head against the grimy window, watching the city wake up her mind, a frantic abacus calculating figures. Okay, last night's tips were $187. After setting aside money for the bus pass and groceries, that's $140. Mom's new medication is $950 for a 30-day supply. That means I need 6 more shifts, just like last night, with no bad tables, just to cover 1 bottle. And that doesn't even touch the outstanding hospital bill from the last infection. She felt a familiar knot of acid tighten in her stomach. It was a constant companion, a physical manifestation of her anxiety. Arriving at Aria was like stepping into another dimension. The air inside was cool and smelled of lemon verbena and old money. Polished mahogany brass fittings that gleamed under recessed lighting and colossal abstract paintings adorned the walls. Her manager, Mr. Dubois, a man whose spine seemed to be permanently fused into a posture of disapproval, was already inspecting the table settings. Thompson. Your section has the Harrison party at 7. They're celebrating their anniversary. Do try not to look like you've been wrestling with a bear, he said, his eyes flicking over her, missing nothing. Yes, Mr. Dubois, she replied, her voice a practiced monotone. The first few hours were a blur of routine, polishing silverware until her fingerprints vanished, memorizing the day's specials, a pan-seared scallops dish with a saffron risotto, that cost more than her weekly groceries and coordinating with the kitchen. Her work friend, Maria, a veteran waitress in her 40s with a cynical but kind heart, gave her a sympathetic glance. "Heard you got Section 4, Maria whispered, refilling a salt shaker. "You know what that means." Amelia nodded grimly. Section 4 had Table 12, the large secluded booth in the corner. It was the table of choice for the city's young, reckless heirs. The tech bros who just IPO'd the trust fund kids, and the worst of them all, the sons of old money who treated the world like their personal playground. At precisely 8:15 p.m. they arrived, 4 of them all young men in their early 20s, dressed in clothes that looked deliberately casual, but cost a fortune. They moved with an unearned confidence, a swagger that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. At their center was their obvious leader, a young man with sharp aristocratic features, piercing blue eyes, and a cruel curve to his lips. His dark hair was perfectly coiffed, and he wore a Patek Philippe watch that could have paid off half of her mother's medical debt. This was Julian Devereux. Amelia knew the name. Everyone in New York knew the name Devereux. His father, Alistair Devereux, was a titan of real estate and finance, a man whose name was carved into university buildings and museum wings. He was also notoriously a self-made man who had built his empire from nothing. His son, however, was a different story. Julian's exploits were tabloid fodder, crashed sports cars, tumultuous relationships with models, and a general air of disdain for anyone outside his gilded circle. Table 12. "This way," Amelia said, forcing the smile that already felt painful. Julian didn't even look at her. He strode past, sliding into the booth as if he owned it. His friends followed, laughing loudly at a private joke. Amelia handed them the leather-bound menus. Julian held his up, peering at her over the top of it. "What's your name, Amelia, sir?" He let the menu drop to the table with a thud. "Amelia." "Right. Well, Amelia will be drinking. Start with a bottle of the Waitress 2005. And don't be slow about it." Amelia's blood ran cold. The Waitress 2005. She knew the wine list by heart. It was one of the most expensive bottles they had listed at $9,000. She had to double-check with Mr. Dubois for any wine over $5,000. She walked stiffly to the manager's station. "Mr. Dubois' table 12 has ordered the 05 Waitress." Dubois glanced over at the table, his expression unreadable. "Devereux's son." "Very well. Use the crystal decanter." The entire evening was a masterclass in humiliation. Julian and his friends were not just demanding. They were creatively cruel. He would call her over with a sharp snap of his fingers, only to ask a pointless question, and then dismiss her with a wave before she could fully answer. One of his friends accidentally dropped a fork, and when Amelia bent to retrieve it, he made a lewd comment about the view drawing hyena-like laughter from the others. They ordered with abandon platters of oysters, mounds of caviar served with blinis. The Wagyu tomahawk steak for 2. They ordered 2 of them for the 4 of them, and multiple side dishes that they barely touched. Julian would take a single bite of a dish, declare it passable, and push it away. Amelia maintained her professional facade, her movements economical, her voice steady. But inside a storm was raging. Every snap of Julian's fingers felt like a slap. Every condescending remark chipped away at her resolve. She saw her mother's face in the shimmering reflection of the wine glasses, heard the beeping of hospital monitors in the clatter of their silverware. She wasn't just a waitress to them. She was nothing, a non-entity, a tool to be used and discarded. The worst part was Julian's eyes. They followed her cold and calculating. He seemed to be enjoying himself, not just the food and the wine, but the power he wielded over her. He was conducting an orchestra of arrogance, and she was the unwilling first violin. She overheard snippets of their conversation. They talked about summering in the Hamptons, a ski trip to Verbier, the new McLaren one of them had just ordered. It was a language from a planet she couldn't even imagine visiting. "My father is on my case again," Julian complained, swirling the deep red wine in his glass. "Going on about character and responsibility. He wants me to take a more active role at Devereux Holdings. Can you imagine me in an office dealing with spreadsheets? It's barbaric." His friends murmured sycophantic agreements. Finally, after nearly 3 hours, they seemed to be winding down. They'd consumed a small fortune's worth of food and wine. The table was a disaster zone of half-eaten delicacies and smeared sauces. The check, Julian commanded, snapping his fingers one last time. Amelia's heart pounded as she went to the terminal. She printed the bill, her hands trembling slightly as she looked at the final figure. With tax, the total came to 14,872.50 centavos. She placed the leather bill folder on the table without a word. Julian barely glanced at it. He pulled a wallet from his jacket, from which he produced a sleek black credit card, the American Express Centurion card, the legendary black card reserved for the world's wealthiest individuals. He tossed it onto the folder. "Run it?" he said, his voice laced with boredom. Amelia took it back to the terminal, her mind racing. A bill this large, even a standard 20% tip, would be nearly $3,000. The thought was so staggering it made her dizzy. $3,000. It would cover her mother's medication for 3 months. It would pay the overdue electricity bill. It would let her breathe just for a moment. Hope, a dangerous and fragile thing, began to flicker in her chest. For the first time all night, she allowed herself to imagine a small reprieve from the crushing weight. She ran the card, brought the slip back with the card and a pen, and placed it discreetly on the table. "Thank you, Mr. Devereux. Whenever you're ready." She turned to walk away, but his voice stopped her. "Wait. Stand here." She froze her back to him. "I said, stand here." He repeated, his tone hardening. She turned slowly to face the table, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. Julian picked up the pen. He looked from the bill slip to her face, a slow, malicious smile spreading across his lips. His friends watched, sensing a final act of theater. He held her gaze as he drew a bold, deliberate line through the tip field. Then, with a flourish, he added a large, unmistakable 0. He didn't stop there. On the total line, he rewrote the exact original amount, 14,72.50. He pushed the folder across the table toward her. "I believe Julian Devereux," said, his voice dripping with condescension for his audience of friends, "that excellent service should be its own reward. You've been paid your wage by the restaurant. That should be sufficient. Don't you agree?" Amelia. The air left Amelia's lungs. The flicker of hope was extinguished, plunged into an icy darkness. It wasn't just the absence of money. It was the deliberateness, the cruelty. He had made her stand there and watch him do it. He had taken her desperation and used it as a source of amusement. The room seemed to tilt, the low hum of conversation fading into a dull roar in her ears. His smiling face, the smirks of his friends. The opulent surroundings, it all swam in a blur. She could feel the tears welling hot and sharp behind her eyes. She fought them back, biting the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Not here. With a hand that shook almost imperceptibly, she picked up the bill folder. Her voice, when it came out, was a strangled whisper. "Thank you, sir. Have a good night." She turned and walked away, her posture rigid. Each step was a monumental effort. She could feel their eyes on her back, could almost hear their silent, mocking laughter. She didn't look at Maria or Mr. Dubois. She walked straight past the kitchen through the staff-only door and into the cramped, windowless break room. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, the dam broke. A sob tore through her raw and ragged. She leaned against the cold metal lockers, sliding down to the floor as the tears she had held back streamed down her face. They weren't just tears for the lost tip. They were tears for her mother, for the endless bills, for the gnawing, relentless anxiety, for the utter humiliation of that moment. They were tears of despair for a world so fundamentally unfair that one person could burn a fortune on a single meal while another fought for her mother's next breath. She buried her face in her hands and cried, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. In the silent, sterile break room, surrounded by the smell of bleach and old coffee, Amelia Thompson felt utterly and completely alone. The linoleum floor of the break room was cold against her cheek. For how long she sat there, a crumpled heap of black fabric and silent sobs, Amelia didn't know. Time seemed to have dissolved along with her composure. The universe had shrunk to the size of this small, sterile room, her grief filling every corner. Each ragged breath was a reminder of Julian's parting shot, a replaying of the deliberate slash of his pen and the smirk on his face. The door creaked open. Maria poked her head in her usually jovial face, etched with concern. She saw Amelia on the floor, and her expression softened into a familiar, weary sadness. She came in, closing the door quietly behind her, and sat on the floor next to Amelia, not touching her whilst offering her presents. "I saw," Maria said softly, her voice devoid of its usual teasing lilt. "The whole thing, the way he made you stand there, the zero." She sighed, a sound heavy with the experience of 1,000 similar, if less dramatic, insults. "He's scum, Mia. Everyone knows it. A rotten apple from a golden tree." Amelia finally lifted her head, her face blotchy and stained with tears. "It's not just the money, Maria. He enjoyed it. It was a game to him." "For them, it's always a game," Maria said, handing her a wad of rough paper towels from the dispenser. "We're just the NPCs in their little simulation. But listen to me." She waited until Amelia met her eyes. "This isn't on you. Your service was perfect. You were a professional. He's the one who's broken, not you." The words were kind, but they offered little comfort against the raw wound of the night's events. Mr. Dubois appeared at the door next. He cleared his throat, his posture as stiff as ever. "Thompson," he began, his tone clipped. "While I appreciate the emotional toll a difficult table can take, you have 2 other tables in your section that require attention. Compose yourself. You have 15 minutes. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. In the world of Aria, the customer was a deity, and the staff were merely supplicants. Julian Devereux could have set fire to the tablecloth, and Mr. Dubois would have likely complimented him on the warmth. His lack of empathy was another small cut in an evening of 1,000 cuts. Amelia nodded numbly, using the paper towels to wipe her face. "Yes, Mr. Dubois." He vanished. Maria gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Go splash some water on your face. I'll keep an eye on your tables. Don't let that bastard win." The next 15 minutes were a blur of autopilot actions. Amelia stared at her reflection in the staff bathroom mirror. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, her skin pale. The cheerful professional waitress was gone, replaced by a haunted-looking young woman on the verge of collapse. She splashed her face with icy water again and again, the shock helping to ground her. Just get through the shift, she told herself. Just get to the end. Then you can fall apart. She reapplied a bit of concealer under her eyes, a cheap brand she'd bought at a drugstore, a pathetic shield against a billionaire's scorn. She took a deep, shuddering breath, pasted on a fragile, brittle version of her smile, and walked back out into the glittering dining room. The Devereux party was gone. Table 12 sat empty, a wasteland of discarded luxury. The busboys were already beginning to clear it, their movements, efficient and impersonal. Out of the corner of her eye, Amelia saw Julian and his friends, swaggering toward the exit, laughing as one of them clapped Julian on the back, likely congratulating him on his performance. The sight sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. She forced her attention to her remaining tables, a quiet older couple and a trio of businesswomen. She refilled their water, answered their questions about the dessert menu, and moved with a robotic grace she didn't feel. But her mind was elsewhere. It was calculating, recalculating. The $3,000 fantasy was gone. Now the reality was starker than ever. Tonight's earnings would be minimal, barely enough to cover the bus pass. The mountain of debt loomed larger and more menacing than before. A feeling of hopelessness began to set in, a cold, heavy blanket, smothering the last embers of her fight. As she was processing the payment for the businesswomen, she noticed a commotion at the front of the restaurant. It wasn't loud or disruptive, but a subtle shift in the room's energy. Heads were turning. Conversations lulled. Patrons near the large windows were looking out at the street. Curiosity piqued. Amelia glanced toward the main entrance. Standing at the curb, so silent and sleek, it seemed to have materialized out of the night itself, was a car. But to call it a car was an understatement. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, long and impossibly black, its polished surfaces reflecting the city lights like liquid obsidian. Its iconic Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament seemed to survey the scene with regal indifference. This wasn't the usual black town car or Uber SUV that ferried Aria's clientele. This was a statement. This was power. Mr. Dubois was already at the door, his posture somehow even more rigid, a nervous energy buzzing around him. A valet stood frozen, unsure of whether to approach such a vehicle. Amelia saw Julian Devereux, who had been lingering near the host stand, preening, suddenly puff up. A wide, arrogant grin spread across his face. He smoothed his jacket and ran a hand through his hair. "Ah, about time," he said loudly to no one in particular, though his voice was pitched for the whole room to hear. "Father's sent my car. He must have closed the deal in Zurich. Probably a new toy to celebrate." He strutted toward the entrance, his friends trailing like pilot fish. He was clearly expecting the door of the Rolls-Royce to be opened for him, a grand exit to cap off his grand performance. The chauffeur's door opened, and a man emerged. He was tall and lean, likely in his late 50s, with silver-grey hair cut in a severe military style. He wore a simple, perfectly tailored black suit, not a chauffeur's uniform, but the attire of a man who meant serious business. His face was impassive, his movements calm and deliberate. He closed the car door with a soft, expensive-sounding thud. Julian stepped forward, chest out. "Took you long enough?" "Arthur," he said, the name dripping with familiarity. "Traffic bad." "The man." Arthur turned his head slowly. His eyes, a pale, piercing grey, swept over Julian Devereux. There was no recognition in them, no deference, nothing but a cool, dismissive blankness. He didn't say a word to Julian. His gaze bypassed him completely, as if Julian were nothing more than a piece of furniture, and began to scan the restaurant's interior. Julian's smile faltered. He took a half step back, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Arthur," he repeated, his voice smaller now. Arthur's eyes continued their sweep of the room. They passed over the wealthy patrons, the fawning Mr. Dubois, the curious staff. They stopped when they landed on Amelia. She was standing by the POS station, holding a payment terminal frozen in place. For a terrifying second, she thought she had done something wrong, that this man was here because of Julian's complaint. Was she going to be fired on the spot? The acid knot in her stomach returned with a vengeance. The man Arthur began to walk into the restaurant. His shoes made no sound on the polished marble floor. He moved with an unnerving grace, a quiet authority that commanded more attention than Julian's blustering ever could. He walked past the host stand. He walked past the bar. He walked directly past the utterly bewildered Julian Devereux, who stood gaping in his wake. He stopped directly in front of Amelia. She stared up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. The restaurant had gone quiet. The only sound was the faint clinking of a fork on a distant plate. The man looked at her, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. His voice when he spoke was low and resonant, a calm baritone that cut through the silence. "Miss Amelia Thompson?" he asked. It wasn't a question so much as a confirmation. Hearing her full name spoken with such gravity sent a jolt through her. She could only nod her throat too tight to speak. "My name is Arthur Vance," he said. "I am the executive assistant to Mr. Alistair Devereux." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. "He has sent me to collect you. The car is waiting." The world tilted on its axis for the second time that night. The silence that fell over Aria was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered the clinking of cutlery and the murmur of conversation. Every head in the opulent dining room turned a synchronized ballet of disbelief. Patrons paused with forks halfway to their mouths, their expressions of bored satisfaction replaced by stark curiosity. The room, which moments before had been a symphony of quiet luxury, was now a silent stage, and the spotlight, intense and unforgiving, had just landed on Amelia. Her mind, still reeling from Julian's calculated cruelty, struggled to form a coherent thought. The world had become a series of disconnected, slow-motion images. The stern, imposing figure of Arthur Vance walking towards her. The gleam of the polished marble floor under his noiseless shoes. The way his presence seemed to command the very air in the room. She felt a primal urge to flee, convinced she had done something terribly wrong, that this man was an enforcer, sent to deliver the final blow to her catastrophic evening. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, unnerving quiet. When Arthur Vance stopped before her, the proximity of his quiet power was overwhelming. He was close enough that she could see the fine, disciplined lines etched around his eyes, the impeccable knot of his simple silk tie. He didn't look at her with malice or accusation, but with a calm, neutral focus that was somehow even more unnerving. Then he spoke her name, Miss Amelia Thompson. The sound of her own name spoken with such formal gravity was a shock that jolted her from her paralysis. It wasn't the dismissive Amelia that Julian had spat at her all night. It was her full name spoken as if it were a matter of great importance. She could only manage a single jerky nod, her throat having closed up completely. "My name is Arthur Vance." He stated, his voice a low, resonant baritone that carried effortlessly through the silent room. "I am the executive assistant to Mr. Alistair Devereux." He paused, letting the weight of that name settle. "He has sent me to collect you. The car is waiting. Collect her." The phrase echoed in the echo chamber of her mind. It was the language of acquisitions of assets being moved. It made no sense. The collective gasp of the room was audible. But no one was more stunned than Julian Devereux. His face, which had been set in a mask of smug satisfaction, twisted into a caricature of bewilderment. The arrogant grin vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed gape. He strode forward, his expensive shoes clicking loudly in the silence, a desperate attempt to reclaim the authority that had so suddenly been usurped. "What is the meaning of this, Arthur?" He demanded, his voice a full octave higher than usual. He tried to project confidence, but a tremor of uncertainty betrayed him. "This is some kind of joke, right? A prank. Father sent you to pick me up. Tell them." Arthur Vance did not deign to turn and face Julian. His focus remained entirely on Amelia, a deliberate and deeply insulting dismissal of the younger Devereux. "My instructions were very specific. Julian," he said, his tone as flat and cold as a slab of granite. "I am here for Miss Thompson." He then softened his gaze ever so slightly as he looked back at Amelia. "If you would be so kind as to gather your belongings, we can be on our way. There is no need for you to remain here any longer." Her belongings. Julian's laugh was a high, hysterical bark that held no humor. "She's a waitress. What is she going to bring her dirty apron and her order pad? What in God's name is going on?" His confusion finally curdled into rage, and he redirected its full force onto the weakest person he could find. "Amelia." "You," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at her. "What did you do? Did you find his number? Did you call my father with some sob story? Did you lie to him?" Before Amelia could flinch or even attempt to form a reply, Arthur Vance finally moved. He turned his head a slow, deliberate rotation and leveled a gaze at Julian so potent with icy disapproval that it seemed to lower the temperature in the room. "That is enough," he said. The two words were spoken quietly, almost conversationally, yet they cracked through the air like a whip. They were not a request. They were a command, backed by a power Julian was only just beginning to comprehend. Julian, who had never been told no in his life, visibly recoiled, taking a half step back as if he'd been physically pushed. The bully, confronted by a true force, had shriveled. Arthur turned his attention back to Amelia, his expression once again unreadable, but for a flicker of something that might have been sympathy. "Miss Thompson, please. There is no need for alarm. I assure you, you are in no trouble. Mr. Devereux wishes to speak with you. Everything will be explained." The spell was broken by the movement of Maria, who walked over from the service station, her face a mixture of awe and fierce protectiveness. She placed a hand on Amelia's arm, a small grounding gesture that brought Amelia back into her own body. It was the anchor she needed in this maelstrom of surrealism. Taking a shaky, deep breath, She found her voice and nodded at Arthur. My bag and coat are in the break room, she managed to whisper. Of course, Arthur replied with a nod. Take your time. I will wait for you here. The walk to the staff-only door felt a mile long. She could feel the weight of every stair, a physical pressure on her back. The whispers started as she passed a rising tide of speculation. When the break room door clicked shut behind her, she sagged against it, her body trembling. Was this real? Had the stress of the evening finally caused her to snap to invent this entire impossible scenario? She looked at her reflection in the smudged mirror above the sink, the puffy eyes, the pale skin, and knew this was no dream. She fumbled with her locker, her fingers clumsy and numb. She grabbed her worn canvas tote bag, the cheap fabric a stark contrast to the opulence she had just fled, and her thin, frayed coat. She took one last look around the small, windowless room where she had cried her heart out less than an hour ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed. She had entered this room a victim. Who was she now? When she re-entered the dining room, the atmosphere had grown even more charged. Julian, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and panic, was pacing back and forth while furiously stabbing at his phone. "Pick up! Pick up! Pick up!" he muttered, his voice a strained hiss. "Father, you have to answer me. What is Arthur doing here? He's making a public scene. He's with one of the waitresses. No, I don't know why. Just pick up the damn phone." Arthur Vance stood precisely where she had left him, a pillar of unwavering calm. He saw Amelia and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod towards the main entrance. As she began to walk towards him, she was intercepted by a frantic Mr. Dubois. "Thompson! Amelia! What is this?" he stammered. His usual icy composure melted away into a puddle of raw panic. "Do you know these people? Are you in some kind of trouble? You must tell me what's going on." His concern was not for her, she realized, but for his restaurant, for the disruption to the sacred moneyed peace. I don't know, Mr. Dubois," she answered, her voice still thin and reedy. Mr. Dubois turned his pleading gaze on Arthur. "Is she being fired, sir? If there has been a complaint, I assure you we will handle it internally." Arthur looked down at the flustered restaurant manager, and a shadow of what might have been pity crossed his features. "Miss Thompson is leaving your employment?" "Yes," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "But it is of her own volition. Her resignation is effective immediately." Without another word to Dubois, Arthur offered his arm to Amelia. After a second's hesitation, she took it. The fabric of his suit was impossibly fine, the arm beneath it firm and steady. He began to lead her on the long walk toward the front doors, a slow, deliberate procession through the sea of gawking diners. They were halfway to the entrance when Julian let out a strangled cry. "Father. Finally." "Yes, it's about Arthur. He's here." "What do you mean, you know?" "A test." "What are you talking about? What test?" The tip." Julian's voice trailed off. His pacing stopped. A deathly stillness came over him. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, waxy white. He stared at his phone as if it were a venomous snake. Then his eyes darted wildly around the room before landing on a small, discreet security camera nestled in the ornate ceiling molding. It was a tiny black dome he had never noticed in the countless times he had sat in this very restaurant. The full, horrifying scope of the situation crashed down upon him. He staggered back, his phone slipping from his nerveless fingers and clattering onto the marble floor. The card. He whispered the words, barely audible, meant only for himself. The Centurion card. He said it logs everything. The vendor, the time, the tip entry line. The trap hadn't just been sprung. He had walked into it, preened on the bait, and then slammed the door shut on himself. Arthur didn't pause. He led Amelia out of the cloying atmosphere of the restaurant and into the crisp, cool night air. The valet, who had been frozen with indecision, now scrambled forward, his allegiance instantly transferred. He lunged for the rear door of the Rolls-Royce, pulling the heavy door open with a reverential hush. The interior was a cavern of cream-colored leather and polished, burled walnut, lit by a soft, ambient glow. It smelled of wealth, a combination of fine materials and clean, conditioned air. Amelia slid onto the seat, sinking into the plush upholstery. It felt like crossing a threshold into another reality. Just as the chauffeur closed the door, cutting off the sounds of the city, the restaurant doors flew open again. Julian, his face a grotesque mask of primal desperation, stumbled out onto the sidewalk. His carefully constructed facade of aristocratic cool had been utterly demolished, revealing the terrified child beneath. "Wait!" he screamed, his voice raw with panic. He ran towards the silently idling car, his gait clumsy. "You can't do this, Father! You can't!" He reached the car and began to bang his fists against the thick, tinted window beside Amelia's head. His distorted, shouting face was just inches from hers, but separated by an impassable barrier of soundproof glass. The arrogant prince, who had held her fate in his hands just an hour ago, was now a desperate beggar on the street, hammering impotently against the fortress of his father's judgment. Inside it was perfectly peacefully silent. The sound of his fists was nothing more than a series of dull, pathetic thuds. Arthur, seated in the front passenger seat, simply watched him in the side mirror. For a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he pressed a small, discreet button on the center console. A dark privacy screen glided up silently from between the front and rear compartments, eclipsing the view of Julian's desperate, unraveling form. Arthur picked up a small, integrated telephone handset and pressed a single button. "Yes, Mr. Devereux," he said. "She is with me now. She is safe." "Yes, sir. The message has been delivered. I'll inform him of the final arrangements." "Understood." He replaced the handset and turned in his seat to face Amelia. "Alistair is cutting Julian off," he stated matter-of-factly. "The Centurion card has been deactivated. His access to all family accounts and trust funds has been frozen pending his mandatory enrollment in a 1-year work and therapy program in an entirely different state. The lease on his penthouse is being terminated. He has 24 hours to vacate. The cars, including the one he believed was coming for him tonight, are being repossessed as we speak. The sheer totality of the consequences was breathtaking. But why me? Amelia finally asked, her voice trembling as she clutched her worn tote bag. Why go to all this trouble for me? Because Mr. Devereux doesn't just believe in punishing bad character. Arthur explained, his gaze steady and direct. He believes in rewarding good character. He saw your grace under pressure. He saw you absorb an act of profound disrespect without losing your own dignity. It reminded him, he said, of his own mother. So he had me run a background check. I apologize for the invasion of privacy. It was done with the utmost discretion. He learned of your situation, your mother's illness, your nursing studies, your crushing debt. Arthur reached into the seat-back pocket in front of him. He withdrew a simple, elegant, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a wax D. He held it out to her. "This is not charity, Amelia," he said, his voice softening for the first time. "Mr. Devereux considers it an investment in the kind of person he wants to see more of in the world, the kind of person who understands the value of hard work and the importance of kindness." With fingers that shook almost uncontrollably, Amelia took the envelope. It felt impossibly heavy. She broke the seal and pulled out the contents. The first was a cashier's check made out to Amelia Thompson. She had to read the number 3 times before her brain could process the figures. $250,000, $250,000. The second document was a letter on heavy foundation letterhead. It was a formal, unconditional offer of a full scholarship to cover the entire cost of her nursing degree, tuition books, and all living expenses at any university of her choosing. The tears she had shed in the break room were born of humiliation and despair. The tears that now streamed down her face were of a different nature entirely. They were tears of shock, of catharsis, of a gratitude so immense it was physically painful, a beautiful, shattering release of pressure that she had been holding inside for years. The mountain she had been trying to climb, the one that grew taller with each passing day, had just been leveled. She was free. The journey in the Rolls-Royce was a surreal passage through a city Amelia thought she knew. From inside the hushed, leather-scented cocoon, the familiar streets of Manhattan looked alien, transformed into a silent film of glittering lights and anonymous motion. The car didn't rumble. It glided, an impossibly smooth and silent vessel navigating the chaotic currents of the city. Amelia sat perfectly still on the plush seat, the cream-colored envelope clutched in her hands. It felt heavier than its physical weight, as if it contained the mass of her entire future. Her mind was a whirlwind, desperately trying to stitch together the torn fabric of her reality. An hour ago, she was on a cold linoleum floor, drowning in despair. Now she was a passenger in a vessel of unimaginable wealth, the architect of her misery, facing total ruin, and the solution to all her problems resting in a simple paper envelope. Arthur Vance, sensing her turmoil, finally broke the serene silence. His voice was as calm and measured as before. "Mr. Alistair Devereux asked me to convey his deepest apologies for his son's behavior," he said, his gaze meeting hers in the polished reflection of the privacy screen. He said, and I quote, "The name Devereux was built on a foundation of respect. My son used it as a weapon. You, Miss Thompson, reminded me of what it's supposed to stand for." The words resonated deep within her. It wasn't just about the money or the opportunity, it was about the validation. Her quiet endurance, the dignity she had fought so hard to maintain, had not been invisible after all. It had been seen, and more than that, it had been valued by the one person whose opinion held the power to reshape worlds. She finally looked down at the documents in her hands. The check for $250,000 seemed to hum with energy. She traced the printed numbers with her finger, thinking of the endless, sleepless nights spent agonizing over bills a fraction of this size. This single piece of paper erased years of fear. The second document, the scholarship letter from the Devereux Family Foundation, was even more profound. It wasn't just a lifeline. It was a runway. It was the chance to become the person she was always meant to be. The car slowed, but it wasn't approaching the run-down neighborhood of her studio apartment. Instead, it turned into the private, tree-lined driveway of the Lenox Hill Private Medical Institute, one of the most exclusive and respected hospitals in the world. Its limestone facade glowed warmly, a beacon of health and wealth she had only ever seen in magazines. We've taken the liberty of arranging a consultation for your mother Sarah, with Dr. Annabel Lee Arthur, explained as the uniformed chauffeur opened her door. The air here felt different, cleaner, quieter. Dr. Lee is the leading oncologist in the country. A private suite has been prepared for your mother's immediate transfer. All costs, past, present, and future, have been handled by the Devereux Foundation. Amelia stepped out of the car, her legs feeling like jelly. This was the final, overwhelming act of grace. The check was for her. The scholarship was for her future. But this was for her mother. This was the gift of life itself. A hospital administrator in a sharp suit was already waiting by the entrance, a warm, professional smile on his face. He greeted her by name, as if her arrival were the most natural thing in the world. She turned back to Arthur, the torrent of her emotions finally overflowing. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time that night, they were tears of overwhelming gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered the words, feeling utterly inadequate. I don't know how I can ever repay this." Arthur Vance, the stoic, impassive man, offered her a rare, small smile that reached his pale grey eyes. "Mr. Devereux believes you already have Amelia. Live well. Become a great nurse. That will be repayment enough." He gave a slight, respectful bow of his head, got back in the car, and the Rolls-Royce Phantom retreated into the night as silently and mysteriously as it had appeared. The weeks that followed were a disorienting, beautiful blur. The first order of business was her mother. The transfer was seamless. Amelia walked into Sarah Thompson's new room and gasped. It wasn't a room. It was a suite. It had a large window with a view of the East River, a private bathroom, a small sitting area for visitors, and technology that looked like it belonged on a starship. When her mother, frail and bewildered, was wheeled in, she burst into tears, clutching Amelia's hand. "Mia, what is this? Where are we? We can't afford this." Sarah had cried, her voice thick with fear and confusion. And for the first time, Amelia could reply with absolute certainty. "Yes, Mum. We can. Everything is taken care of. You just have to focus on getting better." The look of dawning comprehension and pure, unadulterated relief on her mother's face was a memory Amelia would cherish for the rest of her life. Dr. Lee, a woman with a brilliant mind and a deeply compassionate presence, met with them the next day, outlining a new aggressive treatment plan that was only possible with the resources the Institute provided. For the first time in years, the prognosis was not just hopeful, it was promising. The next day, Amelia sat in the quiet of her new temporary guest quarters at the hospital and composed an email on her phone. To P. Dubois@arianui.com. Subject resignation, Amelia Thompson. Dear Mr. Dubois, please accept this email as formal notification of my immediate resignation from my position as a waitress at Aria. I wish you and the staff all the best for the future. Sincerely, Amelia Thompson. She hit send without a moment's hesitation. There was no anger, no need for a lengthy explanation. It was a simple closing of a door to a life that no longer existed. With the Foundation's help, she found a bright, airy 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper East Side, just a 10-minute walk from the hospital. The day she moved in was cathartic. There was no longer a need to cram her life into a single room. She set up her mother's future bedroom with soft linens and pictures of them from happier times. She bought a real desk for herself, a place to study that wasn't also her dinner table. As she unpacked her few belongings, she felt the oppressive weight of anxiety she had carried for so long finally completely dissipate. The constant frantic calculations in her mind were replaced by a quiet sense of peace. Her enrollment at NYU's Rory Myers College of Nursing was a dream realized. Walking onto the vibrant campus, she felt a profound sense of belonging she had never experienced at her drab community college. There she had been a ghost rushing from class to her job, too exhausted to make friends or join study groups. Here she was, simply a student. She dove into her studies with a ferocity born of gratitude, her mind sharp and unburdened. About a month into her new life, a courier delivered a flat, heavy envelope to her apartment. Inside, on thick, cream-colored cardstock, was a handwritten note. The handwriting was strong and decisive. Amelia Arthur informs me that you and your mother are settling in well. This is excellent news. Your strength of character continues to be an inspiration. Should you or your mother require anything at all, do not hesitate to call me. My private number is enclosed. The world needs more people like you on the front lines of compassion. Focus on your studies and on your mother. Sincerely, Alistair Devereux. Tucked inside was a prepaid credit card. A small sticky note attached read, "For taxis, groceries, or anything else to make life a little easier. Keep your focus where it matters." It was such a simple, thoughtful gesture, yet it spoke volumes about the man. He hadn't just written a check and walked away. He remained a quiet, supportive presence in the background. One evening, her phone rang. It was Maria from Aria. "Mia. Oh my God, you're alive. You just vanished into that spaceship of a car, and we never heard from you again. Are you okay?" Amelia laughed, a genuine, happy sound. "I'm more than okay, Maria." She spent the next 10 minutes explaining the situation, leaving out the most personal financial details, but confirming the essence of what had happened. Maria was silent for a moment, then let out a low whistle. "I'll be damned. A fairy tale in the middle of Manhattan. You deserve every bit of it, kid. Every single bit." Then her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "But you haven't heard the best part. About Julian." "What about him?" Amelia asked, a knot of curiosity tightening in her stomach. "Oh, it's epic," Maria said with relish. "Leo the busboy. His cousin works at this dive diner out in Queens. Guess who the new dishwasher is? In a grease-stained apron hairnet, the whole 9 yards. It's him, Julian Devereux. Apparently his old man cut him off completely. He's living in some shoebox apartment they're making him pay for with his minimum wage salary. Leo's cousin said he saw him the other day, just staring at his hands all red and raw from the hot water, like he couldn't believe they belonged to him. The king is washing dishes, Mia. Can you believe it?" After she hung up, Amelia sat by her window, looking out at the city lights. She thought of Julian not with glee or a desire for revenge, but with a strange detached pity. He had been born on top of the world and had never bothered to look down. Now he was at the very bottom, forced to see the world from the perspective of those he had once treated as invisible. She didn't know if the experience would redeem him or simply embitter him, but she hoped for his own soul's sake that he would learn something from it. She hoped he would one day understand that power wasn't a license for cruelty, and that a person's worth had nothing to do with their name or their bank account. Her own world had been transformed by an act of immense power and wealth, but she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that it hadn't changed her. She was still Amelia Thompson, the daughter of Sarah Thompson. She was still the girl who wanted to be a nurse, who wanted to ease suffering and offer comfort. The difference was that the universe in a single dramatic night had conspired to give her the tools to do it. The Rolls-Royce was gone, but the journey had just begun. Amelia's story is a powerful reminder that the world can turn on a single moment of kindness or a single act of cruelty. It wasn't the money that defeated Julian Devereux. It was his own character. And it wasn't a lottery ticket that saved Amelia. It was her own dignity and resilience, seen by someone who understood its true value. This story shows us that our true wealth is how we treat people, and that sometimes the universe has a funny, dramatic, and ultimately just way of balancing the scales. If this story of justice and unexpected triumph moved you, please take a second to hit that like button and share it with someone who might need a reminder that good character matters. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life dramas. We want to hear from you. What would you have done in Amelia's shoes? And what do you think is the best way to teach someone like Julian a lesson? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.